So this year for Book Week Scotland, we're looking at the future. And the books that I write generally are concerned with the future because I write for children who are our future, and I write with a hope for a better world. I've mostly written fact. I've written stories for my own children, and I've written stories in rhyme which we've published as Rosie Jane and the Swadgerump, and our new Rosie Jane story, Rosie Jane and the Christmas Carol. But as well as the children's stories, I've written memoirs, a memoir, which is about my childhood in the Isle of Axholme in North Lincolnshire. And even that has references to the future. We need to look to the future in everything we write as writers. I think we always have to have an eye on the future. My last publication before Rosie Jane's Christmas Carol is this book. I don't know if you can see it. Yes. It's Child of the Earth. Child of the Isle was the memoir. Child of the Earth is all about my life lived with a love of nature, and in Lincolnshire, in Orkney, and back again to Lincolnshire, and then here in Caithness for the last almost 11 years. It's all about the future of the planet and how my love of nature has inspired me to spread that message to other people in my writing. I am at present involved in writing a work of fiction, and this is very new to me because I've always said before that I've never had writer's block. I never have. As well as the books, I also write blogs, a blog every month, and I never have writer's block in those writing those things. But now all of a sudden I've got writer's block because I'm writing a work of fiction. So now I sympathise with writers of fiction, and I sympathise with those people who tell me what writer's block's like, because I've got it. But I didn't ever have writer's block when I was writing this. This just came. I wanted to write down how much I appreciated the world around me, and I wanted to write down how important I feel it is to be engaged with the natural world, to have an empathy with the natural world, to feel a part of the natural world, so that the world will stand a chance. Because quite frankly, if we don't feel engaged with it, it doesn't stand a chance. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to read from this book. I'm going to read the introduction. I'm going to read a little bit about when a walrus came to Wick, and I'm going to read a short story, because the book is actually a collection of nature writings of one type or another, including short stories some of the time, so not many, but one or two, and one or two bits of poetry in there too. And also I'm going to read the conclusion, so I better get started because that's quite a bit of reading. The introduction is called Whispers of Wild Things. The strangest thing is that I didn't know it was nature. I lived each day incidentally learning about the reality around me, but I didn't recognise it as the study of nature. The good earth and the profound heavens are certain. We can mess up big time and scar or denude great swathes of our natural heritage, but that is all we have. After the orgy, someone must clear up and make things right again. I'm not a mountaineer, but I have wondered at the haunting, some say haunted, wilderness that is Ben Macdui in the Cairngorms. Stack Polly is reminiscent of the setting for an old western film. These gracious majesties are stunners. It is, however, the everyday nature which has formed me. The influx of ladybirds in that glorious summer of 1976, and ice patterns on the windows of my childhood are my nature. I have looked at, listened to, sniffed and felt the world around me. From a very early age I knew I should be careful about what to taste. I've missed some things, we always do, but I've kept inside me so many of the wonders which have simply been there in my life. I sincerely hope you'll enjoy reading my nature story, and I wish through this book that you and I may be friends and friends of nature. Nature needs all possible friends available right now. Once upon a time, a little girl lived with her mummy and daddy and baby brother in a Lincolnshire backwater, literally a backwater. The Isle of Axholme was marshy and ecologically crammed with riches. The Dutch engineers came in the 17th century and drained the marshes. This meant that local people could no longer work with the familiar ecosystem in order to survive. Everything had changed. The land was rich and fertile, but the people struggled with this new way of life. They moved on, and in the mid-20th century, the little girl played along the old meres and hedgerows, the becks and embankments, down the turberies and on the old common land between the villages. The little girl was me. I loved my home in the top corner of the Lincolnshire fenlands. From the first time I noticed animal footprints in the snow and leaf-parcelled hedgehogs in winter hibernation until now, when I return and thrill to see the ribbons of hawthorn lace which trim the dyke sides in late spring. As a student in Yorkshire, I saw a different beauty in rolling hills dotted with sheep, ivy-clad woodlands, the seashore where some of my ancestors had lived and worked as coastguards, and the estuary where Queen Elizabeth II later opened a single-span suspension bridge in 1981. 3 of our children had the Isle of Axholme as their playground before we moved, with their baby sister, to Orkney in 1986. How life changed then. Scapa Flow, the Atlantic Ocean and the North Sea wrapped themselves around us like soothing silk, and when the waters were churning in the frequent storms, they whispered stories of lives lived which we should never forget. Orcadians lived by farming first and fishing, Shetlanders by fishing first and farming. Both archipelagos test the health and strength of those who keep the old ways alive. There was a great deal of learning to be done. The children came home from school and taught us the history and customs of their new playground. As a family, we discovered wonders. When we returned to Lincolnshire, we had 6 children. We didn't find the 2 younger ones amongst the Neolithic stones and cairns, but like their brother and sisters, they have them etched inside somehow. In North Lincolnshire, we adjusted to the very different and by now changed way of life. Much had happened to the countryside in the years before our return, but the walks were still to be enjoyed. Badgers, foxes and smaller mammals are still out there. We caught sight of a badger at dawn, came face to face with a fox cub on a bike ride, and was startled by a kingfisher darting through trees on the south bank of the Humber. We finally came back to northern Scotland. Caithness is sometimes described as the lowlands beyond the highlands. I'm glad that we are obliged to travel down the North Sea coast to get to Inverness, which is our city, over 100 miles away. The roads are generally good, but the journey requires careful driving and some stretches are best avoided in bad weather. It is heavenly to drive through a sunrise as we keep the sea on our left, and later to catch glimpses of the sun setting to the west as we head homeward. If we take the train, we're still able to see keep the sunrise in our sights part of the way, and we lose count of the deer. Cormorants and shags with their dolman sleeves bask on the rocks at Helmsdale, and lambs do their Zebedee impressions as we whistle by. As I write, the last ashes of logs are dropping in the grate. The man and the dog are sleeping, with whispers of the day past, and a tawny owl softly hoots for me. When I no longer acknowledge these with quiet gratitude, I will have forgotten all that nature has taught me. I owe it. And that is the introduction, and after that follow 12 sections, January to December, and in each section there's a lot about nature, and it's all about nature, but a lot of description, but also, as I said, some stories and one or two bits of poetry. And I think I also recommend some pieces of music to listen to for inspiration as well. Next up, I'm going to read to you about when a walrus came to Wick. It was a wonderful thing, a marvellous thing. By the end, and this was in the month of May, by the end of this month, the trees will be completely green, and the birds which haven't left for the hedgerows will be able to stay well hidden within them. Not at all well hidden, in May 2018, was our very unusual visitor from the north, the walrus. We didn't need to play Where's Wally? He just was. There. You couldn't miss him. Here follows my diary entry for the 24th of May 2018. Wow, a walrus in block letters. A walrus in Wick, basking in the sun by the old lifeboat station. So pink and very flabby, with lots of scars from fighting other male walruses. So thrilled to see him. The next day he left in the afternoon. All of his visitors had been gentle with him. We didn't frighten him away. Teachers took small groups of children and their little faces were a joy. I like to think he was on his holidays, but a little bit of me worries that his arrival on our shore, here in Wick, points to problems further north. We can't always believe the effects of climate change unless we see them. Seeing Wally in Wick has been niggling me. The plight of the walrus seems very far off when I take my tea tray out into the backyard before the house wakes up. I hear the wren sing over and over as if he wants me to know that he is top bird. The blackbird gives him a head start and then gets right into the nervous system, claiming me for his own. I'm won over, until the jackdaws chack from the trees, and I'm in a quandary. They don't make beautiful music, but their calls fascinate me. They're clearly communicating with each other. The sound changes to a bidding call when they're feeding their family. Come on, young uns, this is how to survive. Jackdaws are noisy, antisocial, thieving thugs, yet there is something about them which points to a level of sophistication. Perhaps it is those penetrating, pale eyes which seem to search my soul. There, I've forgotten all about the mess the walrus is in. When the May blossom is on the hedgerow, the trees which line the streets come full out, and swallows and martins fill their beaks with insects caught on the wing. When the last of the potatoes has been planted and the spring cabbages are harvested, it seems hard to believe that we have a problem. But the hawthorn in the flailed hedgerow is dwindling. Cities like Sheffield are chopping down their trees. Insects are depleted in number, and the condition of the swallows and martins leaving us in autumn is the poorer for it. In some areas the potatoes have to cope with flooding, in others with drought, and there are few workers left who are willing to harvest the cabbages for a pittance. No, I haven't forgotten. Today, though, I celebrate what we have, this fresh awakening, this new untainted fluttering, these newborns. So that was about the walrus and my hopes and anxieties about the future. And next I'm going to read you a story which is, I think it comes in the, I'm just wondering which month it comes in, November. It comes in the November section of the book, and it's called Dawning. I first wrote this in 2012. The wind pushed through the gaps in the old house, making eerie sounds and demonstrating real power. Cobwebs fluttered in the face of it and dust settled in its wake. There was no one there. Spiders hugged the walls and 2 mice ran along skirting boards, but no one saw them. The ragged curtains trembled on either side of the small window in the scullery. No one shivered. A door from one of the outbuildings was partly off its hinges and creaked with depth as it moved involuntarily to and fro. The traveller leant against a stout tree trunk and tried in vain to light a cigarette. He looked the old house up and down. He scanned its breadth in the scant light from the moon. He had the measure of it. To him, it was stone and wood and turf and twisted metal. Clearly no one was inside. It would seem that no one had been there for a very long time. He wondered how long. He carefully picked his way through the tangled garden to the door and attempted to open it. It was not as difficult as he had expected, and so he entered more quickly than he had anticipated. He left it wide open. Slowly and gingerly, not wanting any injury from random obstacles, the traveller looked around the little house. There, a rotten wooden cupboard with fragments of linoleum still lining its shelves. There, a small table, white with age, and everywhere signs of a hurried evacuation. No food. The small inhabitants would have finished that off fairly sharpish, but crockery and pans in small numbers showed the traveller where someone had cooked and eaten a very long time ago. He lit his cigarette and watched as the smoke mingled with the cloud of memory that hovered there. A loose flagstone came between him and his exit, but instead of walking around it, his mind was jumping in and out of the stories he had read. He remembered people trapped in cottages such as these. He remembered such places coming and going through years, places like Brigadoon. He remembered Silas Marner, George Eliot's weaver, who had hidden his money as he had hoarded it. He began to work his strong fingers around the loose flagstone. With difficulty he lifted it, but found nothing underneath. He put back the flagstone and laughed at himself. He became aware, however, that he was not alone. He looked behind him. The hairs on the back of his neck bristling with something he did not recognise. There was no one there. You didn't find it. The traveller looked up to see a young woman standing in the open doorway. She wasn't standing very still. She seemed to be swaying, but in a curving, sinuous way. No, I didn't find anything. And should you have found it, would you have kept it? I didn't know what I was looking for. They never do. Who never does? The men who come, they never know what it is that they seek, but they are all seeking something. I didn't come here to find anything. No, you didn't, but there is something missing for you, and you feel an emptiness. How do you... You will not find what is missing here. Go back, and it will be waiting for you. Where? Where did you come from? You seem to know all these things. You tell me where I come from. You come from earth, and it is to earth you shall return. But that which you are searching for is not of the earth. Go back, and you will feel it. With that, The woman turned, and it seemed she was blown along through the garden with the dried leaves and clumps of dead vegetation. He was alone and wondering. He lit another cigarette and walked around and around the old house. It gave him no clue. He wasn't good at taking advice. He was stumped. The wind was less aggressive now and seemed to whisper to him to leave. He closed the door behind him and stood on the path, taking in the night. His feet led him back the way he had come. It seemed the debris on the way through the wood was blown aside ahead of him. The trees coughed and croaked to him as he walked on, and soon he felt a part of it all. Close to the edge of the wood, he sat down and breathed in the night. The night breathed in the traveller too, and so they were one. A man whose life had been bereft of spirituality had been admitted to the spirit world. They found him the next morning, when 2 of the rangers arrived to fell marked trees. They told their story for a very long time. The man they had found had died peacefully and with the most wonderful expression. But the story doesn't end there. The tree, which had been his last earthly resting place, was one of the marked trees felled by the rangers. As it passed through the neighbouring trees to land on the floor of the wood, a cache of acorns and hazelnuts scattered from a crevice within its trunk. They became covered with leaf litter and settled into the earth, where many germinated and developed into saplings and then into trees, breathing life into this world, life and spirit. So a different view of how nature develops and how nature can sustain itself, and also a view of how necessary it is to have that connection with nature. And finally, I'm going to read the conclusion of this book. Last weekend we found that this book had been listed as a finalist in the Independent Authors Network Book of the Year Award, and that was very exciting. It was a great weekend for the world, for the planet, because things looked better in America with a future president who would care about the state of the environment, and we were very excited that this book, which also cares about the state of the world, the nature and the environment, conservation, had been listed as a finalist. So we feel very, very happy about that, very hopeful that people will read it and connect. So I'm going to read you the conclusion to my book. It's not very long, so just bear with me. It's not anything like as long as the other sections I've been reading, I don't think. How much does it matter that we address the fears of environmentalists and conservationists? Is our planet preparing for its end? Should we let it? I have no idea. What I do know, however, is that this generation needs to connect with the natural world at least as much as our ancestors did. There's a reason for this. We are all of the natural world and cannot exist without the other species in it. Our world is not something we own. It owns us. Just as a wasteful and impotent government puffed up by its own navel-gazing will weaken a state, so it is that careless use of nature's resources and a buoyed-up sense of self-aggrandizement by large sections of society will diminish the future prospects of our planet. Though gimmicks and action groups have their place in alerting people to the need for change, these can run out of steam if they're not accompanied by a deep and genuine interest in the subject. We've all debated with family and friends worthy issues which ring bells in our consciences. Nothing wrong with that. However, when the matter is as grave as the detrimental chemical and physical changes to our planet, it is essential that we feel completely connected with the Earth and all its life forms. We are travelling companions. We will arrive nowhere otherwise. I don't know anyone who doesn't recycle in some way. Many people I know limit the unnecessary vehicle journeys they make. Many more switch off the electric to unused lamps and gadgets. We're all doing our bit. But there are some things we can do which are terribly inconvenient. My daughter doesn't use chemicals in her garden. Neither do I. My allotmenteering daughters don't use them on their patch either. My goodness, we suffer. We have slugs and snails to contend with, and I for one have been brought close to tears when a whole raft of seedlings has disappeared in the night with just a slime trail as epitaph. But we soldier on. Disappointment dissipates when I see a thrush doing what thrushes do with snails. A bit macabre, yes, but it is the natural way. I get a buzz when I see little blue tits, devouring greenfly with voracity. Am I weird? You bet. I am conflicted. For example, I know that leather jackets, cranefly larvae, damage the roots of grasses and plants. When they get greedy, they eat the stems too. If I expose them when I am turning the soil, I throw them in the direction of the bird feeding station. But one day, when I was in the garden not so long ago, I heard a strange and soft vrooming noise. I followed it and found a wasp eating a live and wriggling cranefly. I couldn't bear the torture. You bet I'm weird. Should I have been pleased that this particular natural life cycle ended there? It is the connection which is crucial. Whatever we think of nature's ways, a respectful interest will strengthen the bond that already exists naturally. I regret that there is so little opportunity to expose children to the natural world in the school structure, but the new outdoor learning initiative should go some way to redressing the balance. The problem is that if the individual teacher is not connected and their parents aren't either, then what hope for the children could there be? But there is always hope. Hope is little Blue trying to get through my kitchen window because he spotted the bottle with the blue tits painted on it. And hope springs eternal. Thank you for listening.